The alarm clock beeped loudly at 6:30 a.m., and Michael Chen groaned as he reached over to silence it. Another day, another dollar, but never enough dollars. That was his problem. He rolled his tired eyes and stared at the cracked ceiling of his small apartment. The water stain above his bed had grown larger since last month. He'd have to mention it to the landlord again, though he doubted anything would be done about it. Michael dragged himself out of bed and went through his morning routine. Shower, shave, coffee, the same cheap instant coffee he'd been drinking for years. Once in a while, he dreamed about being the kind of person who could afford fancy lattes every morning without checking their bank balance first. At 34, Michael wasn't where he thought he'd be in life. He had done everything right, studied hard, got an accounting degree, landed a steady job at a respectable firm in Chicago. Yet here he was, living in a one-bedroom apartment with furniture he bought secondhand, driving a car with 150,000 miles on it, and watching his college friends buy houses and take vacations on social media. $2,412.58, Michael muttered to himself as he checked his bank account on his phone, a habit he developed years ago. That was all he had to his name until next payday. Enough to cover rent, utilities, and groceries, with maybe $20 left over for fun. He laughed bitterly at the thought. The office was the same as always. Michael's cubicle sat in the middle row of an open floor plan, surrounded by the constant noise of typing, phone calls, and the occasional forced laughter at a boss's joke. He nodded hello to Tom from the next cubicle over as he settled into his chair. "Hey man, coming out for drinks tonight?" Tom asked, spinning around in his chair. "The whole team's going to celebrate Lisa's promotion." Lisa got promoted. Michael hadn't heard. He felt a pang in his chest. Lisa had started at the company 2 years after him. Yeah, to senior financial analyst. "So, you in for drinks?" Michael did some quick mental math. Drinks would be at least $40 he couldn't afford to spend. "Sorry, got a lot of work to catch up on. Maybe next time." The day dragged on. Spreadsheet after spreadsheet. Client meeting after client meeting. Michael advised wealthy clients on tax strategies and investment opportunities, while his own student loans sat at $41,000, barely lower than when he'd graduated despite years of payments. At lunch, he ate the sandwich he packed while scrolling through his phone. His younger brother had posted photos from his trip to Italy with his wife. His high school friend was showing off his new boat. And there was his ex-girlfriend, now engaged to a doctor, flashing a diamond ring that probably cost more than Michael's car. "Chen, I need the Johnson portfolio analysis by 4 p.m., his boss called out as he walked past Michael's desk. "I'll have it ready," Michael replied, closing his social media apps and getting back to work. By 7 p.m., the office had emptied out. Michael could hear the cleaning crew starting their rounds down the hall. He finally finished the extra work his boss had piled on and shut down his computer. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since lunch. On his way home, he stopped at the grocery store, carefully selecting items on sale and calculating the total in his head as he went. $27.43 at checkout, within his budget. Small victories. The rain started just as he reached his apartment building. Great timing, at least. He juggled his grocery bags while unlocking his door, then set about making a simple dinner of pasta and jarred sauce. As he ate alone at his small kitchen table, he opened his laptop to check his budget spreadsheet, the same one he used to track every dollar that came in and went out. After updating his grocery expense, he stared at the numbers. At this rate, he'd have his student loans paid off by the time he was 45. A house deposit saved by 50, maybe. Retirement? He didn't even want to think that far ahead. Michael sighed and closed the laptop. It was nearly 10 p.m., and he had another early start tomorrow. As he got ready for bed, he wondered if this was all there was to life: working, paying bills, and watching other people achieve the milestones he couldn't afford. Little did he know that tomorrow would change everything, starting with a glitching ATM machine in a forgotten corner of the city. Friday had been brutal for Michael. His boss had dumped 3 urgent client reports on his desk at 4:30 p.m., each marked needed by morning. No please, no sorry for the late notice. Just an expectation that Michael would handle it, like always. "Some of us have weekend plans," his coworker Lisa had said with sympathy as she grabbed her designer purse and headed out. Michael had just nodded and turned back to his computer. Weekend plans? His only plan was to stretch his last $20 until payday. By the time he finished, it was nearly midnight. The office building was eerily quiet, with only the distant hum of the cleaning crew's vacuum somewhere on another floor. His eyes burned from staring at spreadsheets, and his back ached from hunching over his keyboard. The rain was coming down in sheets when Michael finally left the building. He pulled his thin jacket tighter around himself, cursing as he splashed through a puddle that soaked his only pair of decent work shoes. His car sat alone in the far corner of the parking lot, looking small and sad under the flickering street light. "Great," he muttered when the engine sputtered twice before catching. The gas light glowed orange on his dashboard. Another expense he'd have to handle. He'd been planning to wait until payday, but with the weekend ahead, he'd need to fill up now. The closest gas station was closed for renovations, forcing Michael to drive an extra 10 minutes to one near the old shopping plaza on 5th Street. The place was practically deserted, with only a bored-looking cashier visible through the convenience store window. After filling his tank with the cheapest gas available, $47.33 that made him wince as he authorized the payment, Michael realized he needed cash for his building's laundry machines. The ancient washers and dryers didn't accept cards, and he'd been putting off laundry day for too long already. He spotted an ATM tucked into the wall beside the convenience store entrance. It wasn't his bank's machine, which meant he'd have to pay a fee, but he was too tired to drive around looking for another option. The ATM looked older than most, with a scratched screen and keys that had seen better days. A strip of peeling tape across the top warned "No recipes" in faded handwriting. Michael sighed and inserted his card anyway. The machine made a grinding noise as it pulled his card in, and the screen flickered several times before displaying the normal welcome message. Michael punched in his PIN -1 to 47 to 8 and waited. Suddenly, the screen went completely black. "Come on," Michael muttered, tapping the side of the machine. A moment later, the screen flashed bright blue, then displayed a series of code and numbers that definitely weren't part of the normal ATM interface. Michael's finger hovered uncertainly over the keypad. Should he cancel the transaction? But what if the machine kept his card? He couldn't afford to wait for a replacement. Before he could decide, the screen flashed again and returned to what looked like the main menu, except some of the buttons were labeled with strange symbols instead of words. Confused but desperate to get his cash, Michael pressed what he thought was the withdrawal button. Nothing happened. He tried another button, then another. On his fourth attempt, the machine made a high-pitched beeping sound and displayed more code. Then the screen suddenly showed, "Processing command." Michael waited, rain dripping from his hair onto the keypad. After what felt like forever, the screen changed again. "Transaction complete. Thank you." But no cash came out. No receipt either, though the tape had warned him about that. And strangest of all, no indication of what transaction had actually been completed. "Perfect end to a perfect day," Michael grumbled, pulling his wet jacket back on. His card popped out of the slot, at least. He grabbed it, shoved it into his wallet, and jogged back to his car through the rain. As he drove home, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something weird had happened at that ATM. But he was too tired to think about it now. All he wanted was to get home, dry off, and collapse into bed. He had no idea that when he woke up tomorrow, his life would never be the same again. Michael woke up late on Saturday morning, his body finally catching up on the sleep it had been denied all week. Sunlight streamed through the blinds he'd forgotten to close. He groaned and reached for his phone to check the time, 11:23 a.m. He couldn't remember the last time he'd slept past 8, even on weekends. His head throbbed slightly from dehydration and stress. Last night felt like a bad dream, the endless work, the pouring rain, that weird ATM that took his card but gave no cash. Speaking of which, he should probably check his account to make sure the machine hadn't charged him anyway. Michael opened his banking app and typed in his password. He rubbed his eyes, still blurry with sleep, and looked at the screen. Then he blinked and looked again. The number on the screen couldn't be right. $2,400,000. That couldn't be his balance. His account never had more than a few $1,000s in it, and right now it should be hovering around $2,400, not $2.4 million. What the? Michael sat up straight, suddenly wide awake. He closed the app and reopened it. Same number. He logged out completely, then logged back in, still the same. His heart began to race. There had to be some mistake. Maybe he was looking at the wrong screen. But no, this was definitely his checking account, the same one he'd had for years. He tapped to view recent transactions, his finger shaking slightly. There it was, the last entry from yesterday. System adjustment credit, $2,397,600, 11:54 p.m. The exact time he'd been at that strange ATM. No way, Michael whispered to his empty apartment. No freaking way. He jumped out of bed and paced around his small living room, phone clutched in his hand like it might disappear. This had to be an error. A glitch in the system. Banks didn't just hand out millions of dollars by accident. Or did they? Michael sat down at his laptop and searched bank error in my favor, and money appeared in my account. The results were a mix of horror stories about people who spent money erroneously deposited in their accounts and ended up in jail, along with tales of bank mistakes that took months to discover. One thought kept running through his mind. What if this was real? What if, somehow, that glitching ATM had actually transferred this money to him? He needed to be sure. Michael threw on clothes, not caring that his shirt was wrinkled or that he hadn't shaved. He had to get to a bank branch to see this with his own eyes. 20 minutes later, Michael stood in line at his local bank, trying not to look as nervous as he felt. The Saturday morning crowd moved slowly. A young couple was opening their first joint account. An old man was depositing what looked like 100 single bills, one by one. Finally, it was his turn. "Good morning, how can I help you today?" The teller, a middle-aged woman with a friendly smile, looked up at him. I need to check my account balance," Michael said, his voice barely audible. "Sure thing. Can I see your ID and debit card?" Michael handed them over with a slightly trembling hand. The teller typed his information into her computer. Her eyes widened slightly, but her professional demeanor didn't crack. "And what did you need to do with your account today, Mr. Chen?" Just checking the balance," Michael managed. Can you tell me what it shows?" The teller lowered her voice. "Your current balance is $2,400,000. Would you like a printed statement?" Michael's knees felt weak, so it wasn't just a glitch in the app. The money was really there, at least according to the bank's systems. "Yes, please," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. She printed the statement and slid it across the counter to him. There it was in black and white. $2,400,000. "Is there anything else I can help you with today?" the teller asked, watching him carefully. "No, that's all. Thank you." Michael folded the statement and put it in his pocket. He walked out of the bank in a daze, the morning sun suddenly too bright, the street noises too loud. He was a millionaire, at least for now. But as the initial shock began to wear off, new questions flooded his mind. How had this happened? Was it really his money now? What if the bank realized their mistake? And most importantly, what should he do next? Michael couldn't sleep. For 3 nights straight, he tossed and turned, his mind racing with thoughts about the money. During the day, he checked his account every hour, half expecting the millions to vanish as mysteriously as they had appeared. But the money stayed put, $2.4 million, just sitting there, waiting. He called in sick to work on Monday and Tuesday, something he'd never done before. How could he focus on spreadsheets and client reports when he had a fortune at his fingertips? His tiny apartment felt even smaller now, the walls closing in as he paced back and forth, weighing his options. "It's not my money," he said aloud to his empty kitchen, instant ramen cooling on the counter. He hadn't been able to eat much. "I didn't earn it. The bank will figure it out eventually." But another voice in his head whispered, "What if they don't? What if this is your one chance?" Michael pulled up his student loan account on his laptop. $41,322.56 in debt. One click, and he could wipe it out completely. He moved his cursor over the Make a Payment button, heart pounding. But he couldn't do it, not yet. He needed to understand what had happened first. He drove back to the ATM where it all started. It looked ordinary in the daylight, old and slightly battered, but just a regular cash machine. No signs warning about malfunctions, no police tape, nothing to suggest it had just created a millionaire. Back home, Michael searched online for news about bank errors or ATM glitches. Nothing local, nothing recent, nothing that matched his situation. He thought about calling the bank directly but stopped himself. What would he say? "Hi, I think your ATM accidentally gave me $2 million. Can you check on that?" They'd freeze his account immediately. On Wednesday morning, Michael's phone rang. Unknown number. He let it go to voicemail, his stomach in knots. What if it was the bank? What if they were already onto him? The caller didn't leave a message. That afternoon, he finally worked up the courage to test the waters. He withdrew $200 from a different ATM. The machine dispensed the cash without hesitation. His heart raced as he checked his balance afterward, still $2,399,800. The transaction had gone through normally. That night, he made a list of pros and cons. If he kept the money and spent it, he could pay off all his debts, buy a nice house outright, quit his soul-crushing job, travel the world, help his parents retire comfortably, never worry about money again. But if he got caught, he could go to jail for fraud or theft, lose his accounting license, destroy his career forever, bring shame to his family, end up worse off than before. He thought about his old college buddy, Pete, who had become a lawyer. Maybe he could ask for advice without giving too many details. But even that felt risky. The fewer people who knew about this, the better. What's the statute of limitations on bank errors? He typed into his search bar, then quickly deleted it. Did he really want that in his search history? Thursday evening, Michael's doorbell rang unexpectedly. He froze, half convinced it would be the police or FBI agents coming to arrest him. But when he peeked through the peephole, it was just his neighbor asking if he could accept a package. The close call left him shaken. This was no way to live, jumping at every sound, suspicious of every call, unable to enjoy the money or even make a decision about it. By Friday, 1 week after the ATM incident, Michael had made up his mind. He couldn't keep living in this limbo. The money was destroying his peace of mind before he'd spent a single dollar of it. He sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring at his phone. His banking app showed the millions still there, untouched. The right thing to do was obvious. He should report it, but something still held him back. The phone rang again, the same unknown number from before. This time, with a deep breath, Michael answered. "Hello, Mr. Chen," said an unfamiliar voice. "This is David Wilson from First National Bank's Security Department. We need to discuss some unusual activity on your account." Michael's blood ran cold. The moment of truth had arrived. Michael's hand trembled as he held the phone. "Yes, this is Michael Chen," he managed to say, his mouth suddenly dry. "Mr. Chen, we've noticed some unusual activity on your account last Friday night. According to our records, you attempted a transaction at an ATM on 5th Street Plaza around midnight. Is that correct?" Michael swallowed hard. "Yes, that's right." "And did you experience any issues with that machine?" This was it, the moment to come clean. Michael took a deep breath. "Actually, yes." The screen went blank, then showed some strange code. "I tried pressing some buttons to get it to work, but it just said transaction complete without giving me any cash." There was a pause on the other end. "I see," said David Wilson. "And have you noticed anything unusual with your account since then?" Michael's heart pounded so loudly he was sure the man could hear it through the phone. "Well, yes. There seems to be a large sum of money in my account that wasn't there before." "Can you verify your current balance as you see it?" "It says $2,400,000, Michael replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for confirming that," David said, his tone unnervingly calm. "We've been conducting an audit of our ATM network following a system update last Friday night. Several machines experienced what we call debug mode activations when users attempted transactions during the update window." Michael frowned, confused. This wasn't the accusation he'd been expecting. "Mr. Chen, would you be available to come into our main branch today? We'd like to discuss this matter in person. It's nothing to worry about," David added quickly. "We just need to gather some information about what you experienced." Nothing to worry about. Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one possibly facing fraud charges, but what choice did Michael have? "I can be there at 2 p.m., he said. "Perfect. Ask for me at the reception desk. And Mr. Chen, thank you for your honesty." Michael spent the next 2 hours in a state of controlled panic. He showered, put on his best suit, the one he wore to job interviews, and rehearsed what he would say. He would explain exactly what happened, emphasize that he hadn't spent a cent of the money, and hope for leniency. The main branch of First National Bank was an imposing building downtown, all glass and steel. Michael walked through the revolving door at 1:55 p.m., his steps heavy with dread. This could be his last few moments as a free man. The receptionist directed him to a conference room on the 3rd floor. When he entered, he was surprised to find 3 people waiting for him. David Wilson, a middle-aged man in a crisp suit, a younger woman with glasses who introduced herself as Jen from the IT department, and an older gentleman with silver hair who was introduced as Robert Powell, the bank's regional director. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Chen," said Robert, gesturing for Michael to take a seat. "We appreciate your prompt response to our call." Michael sat stiffly, hands clasped on the table to hide their trembling. "Of course." David opened a folder. "As I mentioned on the phone, we experienced some technical issues during a system update last Friday. What I didn't explain fully is the nature of the problem." Jen, the 8 specialist, leaned forward. "Our ATM network was running a software patch that contained a hidden debugging function. Under very specific circumstances, like the sequence of buttons you pressed after the error screen, this function could trigger a test protocol in our database." "A test protocol," Michael repeated, not understanding. "Yes," said Robert. "In simple terms, the debug mode was designed to verify the system could handle account adjustments by multiplying a sample balance by 1,000 for testing purposes. It was never meant to be accessible in live ATMs or affect real customer accounts." Michael's mind raced to keep up. "So the money in my account is the result of a software error," David confirmed. "Your balance of approximately $2,400 was multiplied by 1,000 during this unintentional debug activation. And you've been staring at this money for a week without spending any of it," Robert noted, studying Michael's face. "Most people might have acted differently." Michael swallowed. "I knew it wasn't mine. I didn't know what to do." The 3 bank officials exchanged looks. Something unspoken passed between them. "Mr. Chen," Robert said finally, "we have an unusual situation on our hands, and we'd like to discuss how we might resolve it to everyone's satisfaction." Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Everyone's satisfaction," he repeated cautiously. Whatever was coming, it didn't sound like handcuffs and a police escort. Robert Powell folded his hands on the table. "Mr. Chen, this situation is unusual, to say the least. The bank has experienced a significant software failure, one that could have serious implications if word got out." "What Robert means," Jen cut in, pushing her glasses up, "is that we'd prefer to handle this quietly. If customers found out our ATMs could randomly multiply their balances by 1,000, we have people pressing every button combination trying to hit the jackpot." David nodded, "Not to mention our shareholders' reaction if they learned about this security vulnerability." Michael's accounting brain quickly put the pieces together. "So you're worried about public relations and potential copycat attempts?" "Precisely," said Robert. "Which brings us to you, Mr. Chen. You discovered this flaw by accident, reported it honestly, and didn't attempt to take advantage of the situation. From where I'm sitting, that makes you less of a problem and more of a solution." "A solution?" Michael echoed, still not understanding where this was going. Robert slid a folder across the table. "Have you ever heard of a bug bounty, Mr. Chen?" Michael nodded slowly. "It's when tech companies pay people who find flaws in their systems." "Exactly," said Jen with a smile. "Technically, you found a pretty major bug in our banking system. A bug that could have cost us millions if someone less honest had discovered it." Michael opened the folder. Inside was a document on bank letterhead. As he scanned it, his eyes widened. "This says," he looked up in disbelief, "we're offering you $250,000 as a reward for identifying this security vulnerability," Robert confirmed. In exchange, we'll need you to sign a non-disclosure agreement about the specific nature of the bug and how you triggered it. $250,000? Michael repeated, his voice cracking slightly. It wasn't $2.4 million, but it was more money than he'd ever seen in his life. We think it's fair compensation, David said. After all, if you've been a professional security researcher testing our systems, that's what we might have paid for finding such a critical issue. Of course, Robert added, we'll need to reverse the erroneous deposit first. The $2.4 million was never meant to be in your account. But the $250,000 reward would be yours to keep free and clear. Michael stared at the document, trying to process what was happening. Just an hour ago, he'd been preparing himself for criminal charges. Now they were offering him $250,000. There's more, Jen said, sliding another document toward him. NextGen Banking Solutions, that's the company that created our ATM software, has asked if you'd be willing to consult with their security team. They'd like to understand exactly what you did and what you saw. It would just be a few meetings, but they're offering an additional consulting fee. Michael picked up the second document. The consulting fee was $50,000. So, $300,000 total, he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Robert nodded. Consider it a thank you for your honesty and discretion. Many people in your position would have immediately withdrawn as much cash as possible and disappeared. I don't know what to say, Michael stammered. Say yes, Jen suggested with a smile. Use the money to do something good. Michael thought about his cramped apartment, his student loans, his beaten-up car. He thought about all the times he'd had to say no to friends, all the opportunities he'd missed because he couldn't afford them. $300,000 wouldn't make him a millionaire, but it would change his life completely. Can I think about it? He asked, though he already knew his answer. Of course, said Robert. Take the documents home, read them carefully. We'll need your decision by Monday. As Michael gathered the papers with slightly shaking hands, David leaned forward. One more thing, Mr. Chen. NextGen was quite impressed when we described your background. They mentioned they might have an opening in their financial security division if you're interested in a career change. Michael blinked in surprise. A new job too. It seems, Robert said with a slight smile, that your unfortunate ATM experience might turn out to be quite fortunate after all. 6 months later, Michael stood in the empty living room of his new condo, watching the morning sunlight stream through the windows. He still couldn't believe this place was his. No landlord, no roommates, no more worrying about rent increases. Just his own space, bought and paid for. The $300,000 hadn't made him a millionaire, but it had changed everything. After signing the agreements with the bank and NextGen, the first thing he'd done was pay off his student loans, all $41,322.56 of them. The feeling of seeing that balance hit zero was better than any purchase he could have made. His phone buzzed with a text from his mom. Don't forget dinner on Sunday. Dad's making his famous dumplings. Michael smiled as he typed back a quick, can't wait. His parents had been shocked when he told them he paid off their mortgage with part of his reward money. His dad had actually cried, something Michael had never seen before. You work so hard, he told them. Now you can think about retiring earlier. The doorbell rang, the movers with the last of his furniture. As they set up his new desk in the second bedroom, Michael thought about how different his life looked now. He hadn't just changed apartments, he'd changed everything. 2 weeks after that meeting at the bank, he'd accepted NextGen's job offer. The position paid nearly double his old accounting salary, with better benefits and the flexibility to work from home 3 days a week. His new title, Financial Security Consultant, still made him smile when he saw it on his business cards. Where would you like this bookshelf, sir? One of the movers asked. Against that wall, please, Michael replied, still not used to owning enough books to need a whole shelf. With his new schedule and financial freedom, he'd finally had time to rediscover reading for pleasure. Later that afternoon, after the movers had left, Michael sat on his new couch and opened his laptop to check his banking app, a habit he couldn't seem to break. His balance was healthy but nowhere near millions, and that was okay. Sometimes he still thought about those few days when he'd been a millionaire. The temptation, the fear, the endless what-ifs. In his darkest moments, he'd imagined himself on a beach somewhere, living off stolen money and looking over his shoulder for the rest of his life. The reality had turned out so much better. His phone buzzed again. A text from Tom, his former co-worker. "Still on for basketball tomorrow?" "Definitely," Michael replied. His new financial security had allowed him to say yes to social invitations he would have once declined. The friendships he'd been neglecting due to money stress were flourishing again. As evening approached, Michael walked out onto his small balcony and looked at the city skyline. The same city he'd lived in for years, but somehow it felt different now. Less intimidating, more full of possibility. His new job had introduced him to people who valued his skills and perspective. The consulting work had connected him with professionals across the industry. He even had a date next weekend, something he hadn't had time or confidence for in his previous life. All because of one glitchy ATM on a rainy night. Michael sometimes wondered if things would have turned out differently if he'd tried to keep the millions. If he'd withdrawn the money, disappeared, started over somewhere else, he probably would have been caught eventually. Even if he hadn't, he would have been living a lie, looking over his shoulder, unable to explain his wealth, cut off from family and friends. The honest path had given him something the millions never could have: peace of mind. The ability to sleep at night. The freedom to build a life he was proud of. His phone rang. It was Jen from Nextion's security team. "Hey, Michael. We just found another weird system behavior in the update we're testing. Any chance you could look at it tomorrow?" "Sure thing," he answered, smiling at how much his life had changed. The millions had vanished from his account as quickly as they had appeared, but what remained was worth so much more. A fresh start, honest success, and the chance to build the life he'd always wanted. He wasn't a millionaire. He was something better, a man with options, opportunities, and a future full of possibility.